Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day, and today we are going to be talking about compromise. Specifically, the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. Our first vocab word is sectionalism. This is a repeat vocab word. An exaggerated loyalty to a particular region of the country. Back in the day, our country was broken up really into three regions: the North, the South, and the West. Loyal to an area as in North, South, or West. And this sectionalism was one of the causes of the Civil War. It was really between the North and the South. Our second word is fugitive. Official, a runaway, as in runaway slave. And fugitives contributed to the bad feelings between the North and the South because Southerners thought the Northerners should give their property, as in slaves, back to them. And they often didn't. All right, the Missouri Compromise. In 1820, we had 11 free states and 11 slave states. The North and the South had different economic systems. The North's economic system was based on industry, and the South's economic system was based on agricultural or farming. And both regions competed for new land in the West. The South wanted new land to grow cotton, and ultimately that would bring slaves into the West, and the Northerners did not want any more slave states. So the Southerners, even those who disliked slavery, opposed anti-slavery efforts. Most of the people in the South did not have slaves, and they were those yeoman farmers. But when the Northerners started saying that the Southerners couldn't have slaves, they automatically said, yes, we can, because it's human nature. If somebody tells you to do something, you do the exact opposite. So the Southerners didn't like the Northerners telling them what to do. Slavery is bad. You need to stop. Shut up and stay out of our business. And that was kind of the feeling between the North and the South. So differences grew, and sectionalism lines were drawn. So Clay's proposal: Missouri would come in as a slave state, and Maine would come in as a free state, and there would be no slavery in the remainder of the Louisiana Territory above the 3630 line. So the results of the Missouri Compromise: it basically prevented a war. In 1820, industry was even between the North and the South. The North had just as much industry as the South. In 1860, the North's industry had grown over that 40 years, so they had a lot more industry than the South did, which basically stayed the same. So because of this, the South probably would have won the war in 1820, because they almost won it anyway, being out-industried in 1860. John Quincy Adams wrote this down after the Missouri Compromise: I have favored this Missouri Compromise, believing it to be all that could be effected under the present Constitution, and from extreme unwillingness to put the Union at hazard. So he liked it because it saved the country. But perhaps it would have been wiser as well as a bolder course to have persisted in the restriction upon Missouri, not letting them have slavery, until it should have terminated in a convention of the states to revise and amend the Constitution. This would have produced a new union of 13 or 14 states unpolluted with slavery. So he's saying that his alternate solution would be to not let the South have their way with Missouri. That would have caused them to eventually amend the Constitution outlawing slavery, which would have caused the South to leave and form their own country. If the Union must be dissolved, slavery is precisely the question on which it ought to break. Those were just his thoughts. That's not what really happened. So in his diary entry, John Quincy Adams describes a constitutional amendment prohibiting slavery as an alternate solution to the issues that dealt with the Missouri Compromise. The historical significance of the Missouri Compromise: it preserved the balance of power in the Senate between the free and the slave states. Since there were 11 free states and 11 slave states and 2 representatives from each state, you had 22 representatives voting for the free states, and you had 22 representatives voting for the slave states. Now, if Missouri was added, that would have added 2 more votes here, and that's what they didn't like. But since they added Maine at the same time, it kept the voting balance in the Senate the same. So, conflicting views. Now, during the time of the Mexican-American War, politicians started looking at the map, and they noticed that we were probably going to get some land out of this war. Really, that was the whole reason for the war, right? So David Wilmot, a congressman from Pennsylvania, proposed that no slavery would be allowed in any lands that might be acquired from Mexico. No slavery. Well, when John C. Calhoun and the Southerners heard this, they made a counter-proposal, and he said that the government has no authority to ban slavery anywhere or regulate it in any way. Well, John C. Calhoun was using the Fifth Amendment to back up this claim, because the Fifth Amendment says you can't take someone's life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And the Southerners believed that slaves were property. Well, the Northern argument is first the moral argument that people cannot be property. So therefore, the Fifth Amendment doesn't apply. And they added to that, they used the Fifth Amendment. They could use the Fifth Amendment against the Southerners by saying you can't take someone's life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and they could apply that to their liberty. So the Northerners have an argument as well. So I guess what decides this argument is, are slaves considered, can people be property or not? So there was a lot of arguing in Congress about this, but neither proposal passed, but both caused a lot of problems. All right, so in 1848, Zachary Taylor runs for president. He was a Southern Whig, and Lewis Cass was a Northern Democrat from Michigan. Neither candidate took a stand on slavery, and this made a lot of people mad. And so the Democratic Party split, so the anti-slavery, the Northern Democrats, most of them, split off from the Democratic Party and joined with the anti-slavery Whigs and formed the Republican Party of today. So the Republicans were formed around 1848. So Zachary Taylor wins the election, 163 to 127. Now, after he became president, he urged leaders in the 2 territories, California and New Mexico, to apply for statehood. And he said, once you guys become states, then your citizens can use popular sovereignty or voting to decide whether to allow slavery or not. So I asked the question in class, can popular sovereignty, is that a fair way to decide if a place is free or slave? And the same arguments go for voting as well. You can't vote someone's property or freedom away from them. It violates the Fifth Amendment. So California decided no slavery in their constitution. So California was going to come in as a free state. Now, this was going to cause problems in the Senate, just like it did 30 years before with Missouri. So Taylor's plan ran into trouble when California's statehood became tangled up with other issues before Congress. So the issues that arose in Congress when California applied for statehood. So California was going to come in as a free state. That was the biggie, because that would upset the balance in the Senate. But also something that came through Congress at the same time was that they wanted to abolish slavery in Washington, D.C. Our country is called the land of the free, and they thought it was very, very inappropriate to have the capital of the land of the free, Washington, D.C., a place where they would have slaves. So they wanted to at least abolish slavery in that city. Southerners wanted a law that would force people to return fugitive slaves. So that was another one going around there. Now, all three of these things were hotly argued issues in Congress, and all three of them could cause a war. So there was also something about the Texas-New Mexico border in there. But the greatest obstacle was the balance of power in the Senate. At the time, there were 15 slave states and 15 free states, which meant 30 votes apiece in the Senate. So a new compromise comes to light. Henry Clay, Mr. Compromise, is still working in the government. Remember, he got elected for the first time in 1810, so he's been in there for 40 years. It's 1850 now. And he looks at all these different issues going through Congress and decides to create a compromise, create a one-bill compromise with all of these issues included in the bill. So the first part of his compromise is California comes in as a free state, and that's a northern gain. California free. The second one is the New Mexico Territory, there would be no restrictions on slavery. So that is a southern gain. The third issue is New Mexico-Texas border dispute goes in favor of New Mexico. And I'm not sure, I think that's kind of a non-issue between slave and free. Because if this works out, this area is slave, Texas is slave, so that's kind of a non-issue there. The fourth part of the compromise is the slave trade is stopped in Washington, D.C., not slavery itself. So that one's kind of a wash. That's a gain for both sides. The slave trade getting abolished in Washington, D.C. is for the North, and slavery not abolished in D.C. is for the South. And then the last one's kind of a big one for the South, stronger fugitive slave law. Now remember, Henry Clay made all five of those issues one bill in Congress. So if you wanted all these, you had to have this to go along with it. Well, Clay's plan could not pass as a single package. And to make matters worse, President Taylor objected to it. Now, if the president doesn't back it, then there are going to be a lot of people that go along with the president just because he's the president and they're his allies. So the president not backing it was a big deal too. So there were too many members of Congress that objected to one part of Clay's compromise or another. So when they voted on this, if there was a Southerner in Congress and he had to make a vote on this, he's going to hate number one, but he's going to like the rest of them. But he can't vote for it because number one is connected to it. So it can't pass. Now, if there's a Northerner, they're going to love this one, but they're going to hate this one, so they can't vote for it. Now, the reason they can't vote for it is because the people that elected them to that office elected them so they would look out for their interests. And if they voted for this, then they wouldn't be doing that and they wouldn't be able to be reelected. So the Compromise of 1850. President Taylor dies in office, and this helped matters because Millard Fillmore took over and he actually supported the compromise. So now you have the reverse of what was happening before. You have a president that supports it, so he's naturally going to have allies that want to go along with him, so that helped. Stephen A. Douglas, a senator from Illinois, divided Clay's plan up. Representatives could now vote for only the parts they liked. They did not have to vote for the parts they did not agree with. So, when California came up to vote as a free state, all the people that wanted that voted for it. All the people that didn't want it either said no or did not vote at all. So by itself, California coming in as a free state passed. New Mexico Territory, no restrictions on slavery. The ones that were against it abstained or didn't vote or said no, and the ones that were for it voted for it, and that one passed as well individually. New Mexico-Texas border passed in favor of New Mexico. Slave trade, not slavery. The slave trade got abolished in Washington, D.C., but not slavery itself, passed individually, and so did a stronger fugitive slave law. So just that one slight adjustment of separating all these up into individual bills allowed them all to pass, and it was everything that they asked for in Clay's compromise. So the Compromise of 1850 finally passed. Each point passed separately and saved the country from war again. All right, here is today's notebook. Okay, what you guys are going to do is you're going to take a piece of binder paper and you're going to fold it in half the hamburger way. You are going to cut the red margin off one side so it's narrow enough to fit into the notebook. And then you are going to take the top half of the fold and you're going to cut it so it makes two flaps. Now this picture is the foldable with both flaps open. Now when it's closed, it's going to be like half a paper glued in there, and on the left side you're going to write the Missouri Compromise, and on the right side you're going to write the Compromise of 1850. Now when you fold this flap up, in the top portion I want you to write the three things that make up the Missouri Compromise. Maine comes in as a free state, Missouri comes in as a slave state, and everything above the 3630 line is free. And then I want you to draw a picture that represents the Missouri Compromise. As you can see, we have the 3630 line here. The top person's free, and the bottom person has a chain. All right, on this side, I want you to write the 5 points. So now open up this flap, and I want you to write the 5 points of the Compromise of 1850, and I want you to draw a picture that goes with it. You can see that this one, California comes in as a free state. Down here, I want you to write the historical significance of the Missouri Compromise. Now over here, I want you to draw a circle diagram, and on this side I want the northern gains from the Compromise of 1850, which is California was admitted as a free state and the slave trade would end in Washington, D.C. Those were the northern gains. And then I want you to make another circle with the southern gains, and it has 3 bullets in it. New Mexico Territory would have no restrictions on slavery. Slavery would still exist in Washington, D.C., and there would be stronger fugitive slave laws. So put that in there and color it up. Your writing portion is write a short paragraph answering the question, do you think the government has the power to ban slavery? Explain. So you either take the northern side and back it up with the Fifth Amendment and the moral argument, or you take the southern side and back it up with slaves being property in the Fifth Amendment. Well, that's your lesson for the day, kids. Get your notebook done and have a great day.